soul have not been a guide very long. It happens that when we go into guide status, that typically we have ceased our incarnations. We've become non-incarnating masters because of all the work we've done over such a long period. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on Earth, of course, as we've discussed. It could be in other places. But typically, your guide is not someone who you will find incarnating on Earth. But once in a great while, you'll find a person, a soul, a being, who's, for want of a better word, in training to be a new guide. And they are still not quite through. They have some work to do in their incarnations with teaching others. So you can have that situation. But typically, what we have on Earth, I think, in terms of advanced beings, are a group called the Watchers. I've given that name for want of a better word, who aren't teacher guides, so to speak, in the spirit world. These are advanced beings who are incarnating to try to see if they can raise the consciousness of Earth. They aren't people who are necessarily CEOs of large corporations. These are very humble people in our midst. And they're very ethereal people who are quite advanced, and I speak of them too in my books, and I call them the Watchers. And I don't know that there's a lot of them, but they definitely do exist on Earth.
So some of them do come down to help people out a bit.
To help us, yeah, to raise our consciousness and to try to make the world a better place and try to make us better people by simply knowing them. So it's a very beautiful thing if you have contact with such an individual like that.
Michael, another issue you brought up in one of your books, which I found a really interesting concept as well, was that some, or I don't know if it was all or some souls will be incarnated at the same time in different bodies. And
parallel lives. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now that could bring up a fascinating point. I mean, do they ever meet? How would they feel if you meet?
Well, they typically don't. Now, I want to be honest with you, Emily. There are some books that have been written by people who love sensationalism because they want to sell books. Now, forgive me for being blunt here. Very few people have ever had a parallel life, and if they have, they've probably only had it once and never want to do it again. Guides do not encourage parallel lives, I found. This is a very difficult thing, dividing your soul. Usually, the bodies you choose will be at the opposite ends of the earth and usually a different gender. I mean, let's face it, what purpose would there be for a soul to join two twins in the same household in the same city and have the same upbringing? I mean, there's not much learning going on there for the other soul, if you will. So the other part of your soul. So typically, when parallel lives happen, usually, for example, if you're say a wealthy person in the suburb of Chicago, your counterpart is perhaps in Bangladesh, suffering as a woman in a very disadvantaged family. So, I mean, the idea with living parallel lives is to speed up the advancement of your soul. They want to double up. And it's difficult. It's very, very hard. And as a result of this, I find it, and with my clients, if they ever have had a parallel life, not only do they not meet their counterpart, but they don't really want to do it again. Once is enough. So that...
I would think it would be possibly quite hard to maintain sanity if you're sort of running two lives at one time.
Yes. I mean, of course, you're living two different existences, let's face it. And we know the soul can divide because naturally you divide when you come to Earth, and part of you stays behind. But nonetheless, if you're involved with, rather than the contemplation that goes on in the spirit world and the kind of work that goes on up there between lives, is quite different from living in two different bodies that have incarnated on Earth at the same time. I mean, talk about pressure. That's it. So I think, as opposed to what you read a lot about, parallel lives is really not all that common.
Michael, a big bone of contention, I think, and a cause of a lot of probably sort of religious conflict and stuff is over at what point the soul takes over the body. Is it at conception? Is it during pregnancy? Or is it after birth? What have you found to be the case?
Remarkably consistent reports. And it gives me great confidence to say this after thousands of cases and after my disciples, if you will, have found the same thing. Souls do not join. Speaking like God here, please forgive me, Emily, but from all we've learned, souls do not join the fetus until after the 3rd month. And they don't do it for a reason. The reason that they need at least 4 months of development, many souls join at 6 months, is the fact that the brain has not developed enough for them to begin to work with that brain. I have cited cases in my books explaining how souls begin to join with the human brain. One of my best accounts comes from a medical doctor who, in the state of Nevada, who gave me a wonderful account of all of the subtlety that goes in to a highly intelligent spiritual form joining with a very immature brain of a child in the fetal state. It's very delicate, very careful work. You don't want to shock this new brain. What happens is, if it's done skillfully, is that the brain accepts this new entity, if I can call it that, as a friend, as someone who's come to kind of be with them as a partner. And that is the way it's intended, apparently. So that by the time of birth, you have this beautiful melding of a soul with a human brain. And this brings up a very complex aspect of our work, the soul versus the human brain, Emily, and we should mention this. Now, souls have, as I said, an immortal character, and they're combined here with a temperament and the mental abilities, the central nervous system, and so forth, the emotions of the human brain to produce one personality in one lifetime. And in your next life, you might have an entirely different personality because of all the variables. For example, a soul combating a need to control others, for instance, just using this as an example, or say fighting self-indulgence, may be comfortable working in conjunction with a brain disposed to an aggressive tendency, behavior. And so you have a situation there in opposition. On the other hand, you could have souls working with brains that are quite different. A passive soul, for example, might want a highly emotional, restless body, and vice versa. So there is this push-me, pull-you that goes on, and it's one of the marvelous aspects of our work because we can help people see why they are the way they are. And so, so much of this goes into body choice, which is a very intricate subject in itself. It's not by accident. You're not in your body by accident. People look in the mirror and they ask themselves, why am I me? There are reasons. And once people, have an idea of what these are, I think they're more comfortable in the bodies that they have. So it is a very complex question, Emily, and one that has a lot of ramifications.
It certainly does. It was interesting what you just said about the brain also having certain character and aspects to it, because I tend to sort of think that it's the soul that has all the character and the brain is just a lump of meat, but that really does have, well not quite thoughts and emotions, but it does.
Yes,
it is
exactly.
driven in its own way.
That's right, and we're driven by certainly our the senses that we have, and with hunger and sex and pain and survival. But the soul it gives us intuition, insight, imagination, conscience, these sorts of things. So, the relationship between your soul and your body is one that I think has huge ramifications in terms of therapy. In fact, I'll go so far as to say this, Emily. I think in future decades, the work that we do is going to be part of mainstream psychotherapy. I hope so. Because we can learn more in 1 3-hour session than sometimes working with a psychiatrist for, 5 years.